Hi, class. I hope everyone is doing well today. I wanted to start by letting you know that I've been doing some thinking in terms of the final few assignments that we have remaining. Um, it seems like the request for developing the advanced income statements. I don't think it's an appropriate setting right now, just because it will be fairly challenging, especially since the ideas are at such an early stage. And typically, I've used that for the more advanced course, which is designing the business plan. So instead, what we're going to do today is actually what was due next week, which is the startup funding costs. So don't worry about the assignment that's actually listed for today. The assignment that we'll be doing for this week and the next week as well is about the startup funding costs. So to begin, I've developed an outline which you can find within your folder. It's labeled WSU Startup Funding Cost Template Spreadsheet. And there's some important things to kind of take into account here. So first of all, I've broken it down into 4 general categories, even though there's obviously more depending on what the nature of the business is, or it can be less. So these are general categories that would fit most companies that are looking to manufacture some type of product or even a service that's, typically delivered in a physical format. So what I mean by that is a lot of the materials that might be listed, like raw materials for production or production equipment, facilities, especially, whether we're talking about an actual production site or warehousing, or if it's an entirely virtual product, there is neither of those necessities except for possibly, some kind of data house, but that would possibly even just be outsourced to another company. So this is more in line with your typical kind of company that would be manufacturing a physical product or delivering a service in the more traditional sense of the word. So let's start first by looking at what these categories are. So if you have opened the spreadsheet now, you'll see that the first one is development, then it's production, marketing, and sales. Okay. So for each one of these categories, I've tried to start with kind of what's the overarching objective and what's trying to be accomplished. So if you think about the development stage, because it's going to vary for each one of you, to take a general kind of example, okay, if I was trying to build a chair, some of the raw materials I'd need for development would be the wood to build the chair, then I need the tools to assemble it, the various screws, bolts, etc., right? So if we just said that it was wood, tools, and then screws and bolts, just to keep it simple, okay, those would be the raw materials that I'd need to use to develop a chair, okay? The key employees in this example would then be the people, and in this case, it would be a carpenter that would be actually capable of taking those raw materials and making the chair out of it, okay? At that point, the essential equipment might just be, those tools. So it kind of is one and the same with the raw materials. If it was a different kind of product, the essential equipment would be, things that would actually produce the initial versions of the technology. Intellectual property, if I had some kind of unique way of assembling the chair, maybe I would get a patent on that. So that would be an example of obtaining intellectual property. When you're looking at something like prototyping, it's obviously building that first chair and making sure that it works and, that it doesn't come apart and, making any kind of modifications you might need to make it better. That would essentially be your proof of principle. So if you successfully complete the prototyping, that should give you what's called a proof of principle, okay? And that would actually be, a seal of approval, typically by a third party that says, this product passed the initial prototype test, okay? Proof of concept would go a step beyond that. You'd actually be taking a larger amount of the raw materials, making more products out of them, and testing it in a more advanced setting. So for instance, maybe the first time for the proof of principle, you just said that the chair didn't break. Okay. But then the proof of concept would be a more advanced validation. It would be like, okay, the chair didn't break even when, it had up to 300 pounds of weight on it, or even when it had, was exposed to the sun or whatever. Any kind of differential parameter that gives it even better use. So that would constitute a lot of what you'd see on a product label. When it says that it's resistant to water, let's say, or anything like that. That would be more of what you'd obtain during a proof of concept stage. Okay. And then in the early stages, you're also going to be thinking about a general overview of what your production, marketing, and sales might cost. Okay. So if we go now to the production, we're talking about facility expenses. Okay. In your case, let's say if you were the carpenter with the making those chairs, you might need, to have some kind of little shop where you can actually assemble them. You might need to have a warehouse that stores the chairs before you sell them to the end user, right? And once you're in the production stage, you're also starting to obtain more of those raw materials for production. And usually, right, that means if I was trying to build, let's say, 100 chairs and I could only do 10, that would also mean I need more people to actually build those alongside me. Or I could also have, skilled equipment operators that use certain production equipment to build the chairs more efficiently than even a human can. So those kind of areas, really numbers 22 through 24, it depends a lot on whether or not you're going to be doing it in-house, and whether or not you're going to be doing it manually and operating the equipment or getting any specialized equipment to make the production process faster. So those can be variable in a lot of cases. Qualitative and regulatory compliance, you'd need to be talking to the various regulatory agencies. A good example is, the FDA for anything that's food related and drugs as well. But specifically, when you read the packaging label on something that is edible, it's going to contain that information about, what allergens it has, whether it was produced in a facility that, uses peanut products, for example. Any kind of information like that becomes part of the safety notices that must be included with the product. So you need to be aware of that, and that would entail talking to those agencies and also gaining a list of what those kind of expenses might be to do that testing, to ensure that you're actually up to par with what the regulations require. In terms of the pilot production run, you're looking at trying to make a small amount, about 5% of the total capacity that you could produce in a year. So what it is really you're taking it that next step beyond the development phase where you had just enough to make sure, that it worked to a certain point. Now you're actually scaling it up and testing both whether the product works, but also whether your manufacturing process actually works. And that's the reason why it's called the pilot production run, because you don't go full scale and start producing 10 million units of something. You need to start by, making enough just to be able to test that it is valid before you spend the money, time, and effort to develop all the rest of them. As you move on, you can see that there's the scale up of the production run, and that's usually about 50% of capacity. What this means is that you have to look at, being able to get rid of any kind of issues that you had during the pilot testing and ramping up that production as well, where more issues would be revealed. Because a lot of the times, even the best equipment might be good, let's say, for producing 1,000 units, but once it starts needing to produce 10,000 units on a daily basis, something in the equipment's infrastructure starts to fail. So it could mean, that either the production process, somehow deforms the product, or maybe the product tolerances need to be changed so that it can actually fit into a longer lasting kind of cycle. But that's even another testing phase where you're not really at the point of full scale launch, so you're still able to test it. Now, the reason why full production run doesn't reach 100% capacity, and even the 90% is actually high, to be honest, is because what happens is you can never actually be producing 100% of the time. So whether it's the equipment or the people, there's going to be downtime for rest, in the case of a person, or in the case of a machine, there's going to be downtime for maintenance or any kind of upgrades that need to be done. So typically, even, the most advanced manufacturing companies in the world will typically have some kind of downtime. They might be offsetting that downtime by having, other machines being alternated so that they could always be running essentially. But almost all of them are going to have some time that is a downtime in capacity. And it depends really on how intense and laborious the process is to build it, because a lot of those, more advanced products will need a greater amount of downtime because it's so intricate and detailed, the work that the machine is delivering. So final qualitative and regulatory approval, it really has to do with essentially then once you've got those production ready samples, making sure that they do still pass the FDA and other standards in order to make them successful. So I got into a lot of detail with development and production because I think those are the parts that a lot of people might struggle with. Once we get to understanding marketing and sales, there's much greater exposure with customers. Everyone's seen ads, everyone dealt with salespeople, both virtually and in person. So it's much easier for us to understand these remaining concepts. That's why I spent so much time on the earlier sections. But in terms of marketing, obviously it begins with hiring the right marketing personnel specific for your industry. Typically people that, have an experience across a broad range of outreach through media. You're looking at initial marketing campaign costs, which I essentially, would summarize as things like a website development, maintenance, maybe getting your hosts or servers in order so that you can have external storage of customer data, social media ads, anything like that. Sponsored marketing campaigns, which are obviously when you're reaching out to some kind of marketing agency and having them essentially outsource all of your public relations, and then they also develop your various marketing materials and help you kind of release it in a timely manner. Or promotional tours, which are essentially, when a company does and goes and presents at a fair or some kind of exhibition to show the range of its products. And then general external marketing campaigns, things like celebrity sponsorships, everyone knows examples of that, like Nike with LeBron James, for example, and sporting event sponsorships, which include, for instance, how State Farm is one of the sponsors of the NBA. So when we keep going down, skilled salespeople are needed, and this is really specific to what your distribution channel is going to be. If you're going to be the producer and also the end seller, whether it's as a retailer or through e-commerce, you're going to need different kind of expenses. So if you're actually doing it as a retailer in physical stores to sell merchandise, then you have to pay for the location of the store, as well as the maintenance, the operations, the electricity, all of the overheads, and everything else to actually operate it. So those salespeople being there, the management of those salespeople, and so on and so forth. The virtual online example through e-commerce would be that, you can either send a virtual or digital product, which means your process is over, essentially up to that point of sale. Or you could have, some kind of third-party affiliation where your product is sold along with another product that has just been bought as a bundle. For instance, how many laptops come with Microsoft Office in them. And then the last kind of general sales fee, anything I'd like to say, like, both pre and post customer service, so both before they bought the product and after, to handle any kind of issues the product might have. And also any kind of replacement of merchandise with defects. So if you think about anything that you use as an exhibit, in a physical store, that product's going to be wasted. There's going to be products that are produced that, get broken and on display, for example. That's it.